A team of investigators was already on the way to the house, this time for an official and thorough search of the property. But this wasn't just another routine check. Now, the investigators had solid leads. Clues had been carefully gathered and pieced together, pointing them to very specific areas of interest. Their focus shifted to the basement, a space that suddenly held new weight and meaning. Down there, something immediately caught their attention. A section of the concrete floor that looked freshly sealed. In the far corner, barely illuminated by the overhead bulb, stood a raised cement platform. It looked completely out of place. The construction didn't match the rest of the basement, and the materials used appeared oddly inconsistent. Something was off. The team knew this was the place they needed to dig deeper. As they began a careful search of the area, their suspicions were confirmed. That's when they found Lisa Mitchell. Dear viewers, we appreciate your support and comments. It means a lot to us. Thank you for being with us. Lisa Mitchell was born on a warm summer day, August 5th, 1983, in the city of Calgary, Alberta, Canada. From her earliest days, Lisa was a bright, spirited child, often described by those who knew her as imaginative, curious, and full of energy. Her parents noticed her creative streak when she was just a toddler. She would sit for hours with crayons and markers, doodling everything from animals to imaginary worlds, showing a depth of focus rare in children her age. By the age of 4, Lisa had already found a deep love for drawing. Her room was often filled with sketchbooks, coloring pages, and art supplies scattered across the floor. This passion wasn't just a passing phase. It became a defining part of her personality. As she grew, so did her range of interests. In junior high, she joined an after-school art club, and by high school, her creativity had expanded beyond visual arts. She discovered music and fell in love with it almost instantly. With a few close friends, she started a small band where she sang vocals and occasionally played guitar. It was never about fame for Lisa. It was about expression, emotion, and connection. Despite her artistic talents, Lisa's path after high school wasn't straightforward. Upon graduation, she made the practical decision to delay college. She needed to work and support herself financially, especially since her family couldn't afford to fund post-secondary education. For the next few years, she juggled various part-time jobs, from waiting tables at local diners to working retail in downtown Calgary. Life was not easy, but Lisa faced each challenge with quiet resilience. One evening, while working a dinner shift at a mid-range restaurant, she met a man named Allan. He was charming, easygoing, and seemed to genuinely appreciate Lisa's warmth and sense of humor. Their relationship started casually, but it didn't take long before they were inseparable. A few years into their relationship, they welcomed 2 children, a boy first, followed by a little girl. The young couple eventually moved into a modest home in a quiet suburban neighborhood, hoping to build a peaceful life for their growing family. For a while, everything appeared stable. Lisa shifted her focus to raising the children and working evening shifts at a nearby hotel, a job she enjoyed especially because her mother also worked there. The 2 women often shared shifts and became known among coworkers for their close bond and positive attitudes. Life settled into a routine, one filled with everyday moments, school drop-offs, dinner prep, bedtime stories. But beneath the surface, not everything was perfect. On the night of October 27, 2012, Lisa headed to work as usual. It was a special evening. The hotel was hosting a Halloween-themed event, and the atmosphere was festive and upbeat. Guests arrived in costume, music played throughout the building, and Lisa and her mom enjoyed themselves as they managed the crowd. After the event ended and their shift wrapped up, Lisa made a decision to stay the night at her mom's house instead of making the long drive home. It wasn't unusual. She'd done it before when work ran late. The following morning, as they sipped coffee and chatted about the previous night's festivities, Lisa received a phone call. It was brief, but afterward, she quickly announced she needed to leave. She didn't offer much explanation, just that something had come up and she needed to get back home. Her mom, though slightly puzzled, didn't press her. Lisa hugged her goodbye, walked to her car, and drove off. That would be the last time her mother saw her in person. At first, there was no cause for alarm. Lisa was an independent woman, and sometimes she got busy. But as days passed with no calls or texts, a nagging worry began to grow. Lisa always checked in, especially with her mom. A day or two without contact was rare, but a whole week was unheard of. Concerned, her mother began calling, each time reaching voicemail. She reassured herself with excuses. Lisa was probably just swamped with work or dealing with the kids. Still, the silence felt heavier with each passing day. Eventually, unable to ignore her instincts, Lisa's mom drove to her daughter's house. When she arrived, Allan answered the door. He looked calm, but his words did little to ease her fears. He claimed that the day after Lisa left her mother's place, October 28th, they had a disagreement. He said he stepped out briefly to buy cigarettes, and when he returned, Lisa was gone. She had, according to him, left without a word. But something about his account didn't sit right. As she stood in the hallway talking to Allan, Lisa's mother happened to glance at the coat rack by the door. Hanging there were Lisa's winter coat and boots. It was late October in Calgary, already cold. Lisa would never have left without them. Her daughter was practical and cautious, especially when it came to the weather. Even more unsettling, as she continued looking around, she found Lisa's favorite bracelet and necklace sitting untouched on her dresser. These weren't items Lisa would leave behind if she were planning to be away, even briefly. They were sentimental, almost symbolic, things she wore every time she stepped out. However, her purse was nowhere to be found. Before she left the house, Allan mentioned something else. Lisa had sent him an email. He suggested her mom check her inbox as well. That night, back at home, she turned on the computer and opened her email. To her surprise, there was indeed a message from Lisa. The tone was vague, almost generic. Lisa wrote that she was feeling overwhelmed and needed time to herself. She promised to be okay and asked not to be worried. Over the following weeks, more emails trickled in. They were sporadic and somewhat inconsistent, always calm, always insisting that she was fine, but never offering any details. When asked directly where she was or why she left so abruptly, Lisa avoided answering. It was unlike her, and that only deepened the worry. Then came the voicemail. On the morning of November 16th, Lisa's mom woke up and checked her phone to find a missed call. It had come in at 2:45 a.m. from Lisa's number. There was a voicemail. For a moment, she felt relieved. Lisa had reached out. But as she played the message, her relief turned to confusion, then concern. Lisa's voice was there, unmistakably hers. But something about the message was strange. Her words were disjointed, rushed, and hard to follow. "Hey, I'm okay. Sometimes my weeks get crazy, you know, and it was quiet for a while. And then all of a sudden this happened, and within half a day I should, but he's back now, and I got to go. Love you." It was as if she had been interrupted while recording it. There were pauses in strange places. Her tone shifted halfway through. And most disturbingly, the message raised more questions than it answered. Who was he? What had happened so suddenly? Why couldn't she explain? Her mother replayed the message over and over, trying to make sense of it. But clarity never came. She held on to the hope that Lisa was safe, somewhere, sorting things out. But deep down, the uncertainty lingered, and the sense that something was terribly wrong. That was the moment Lisa's mother knew she couldn't wait in silence any longer. Too much time had passed without a single real word from her daughter. Strange emails and one confusing voicemail were not enough. So she did what any mother would do. She went to the police. Sitting in a quiet, wood-paneled office at the local precinct, Lisa's mom recounted everything. She laid it all out, from the last time she saw Lisa to the strange behavior from Allan, the unsettling message on her voicemail, and the unanswered questions about her daughter's disappearance. The detective on duty took careful notes and promised to open a formal investigation. When investigators began their inquiries, It didn't take long before a more complicated picture of Lisa and Allan's relationship began to surface. What had once seemed like a relatively stable home life was, in truth, riddled with turbulence. Through interviews with friends and extended family, it became clear that Lisa and Allan had a long and difficult history. Even before their children were born, the relationship had been a series of ups and downs. Frequent breakups followed by reconciliations, moments of hope eclipsed by repeating patterns of disappointment. Initially, parenthood seemed to calm things. Their focus shifted to their children, and for a time, things appeared to be on steadier ground. But under the surface, deeper frustrations had started to form, particularly for Lisa. As the years passed, she had taken on the heavy weight of being the primary breadwinner. While Allan struggled to maintain consistent employment, Lisa was the one holding everything together. She worked long hours, often in multiple jobs, while still managing most of the responsibilities at home. The stress built up over time, eroding whatever trust and connection remained between them. At one point, Lisa even confided to a close friend that she was seriously considering ending the relationship. But she stayed, mainly for the children, who she loved more than anything. Eventually, detectives brought Allan in for questioning. Sitting across from them, he was calm, composed, and unusually forthcoming. He didn't deny that the relationship had been strained. In fact, he admitted that in recent years, he and Lisa had made a mutual decision to stay together purely for the sake of their kids. According to Allan, their emotional connection had faded, and both of them had essentially been living separate lives under the same roof. What raised some eyebrows, however, was Allan's claim that Lisa had started seeing other men on occasion. He didn't seem particularly upset about it, more resigned than anything else. It wasn't a secret, he told investigators. We both knew it. We weren't pretending to be in love anymore. Still, he insisted that he had no idea where Lisa had gone. He admitted he was surprised that she would just vanish without a trace, but said what confused him most was how she could leave their 2 children behind. Police soon turned their attention to the house the couple had shared. A team conducted a thorough search, combing through each room for anything that might offer answers. But there were no signs of foul play, no immediate evidence to suggest Lisa had been harmed or forced to leave. The home was tidy, almost eerily so. Investigators hoped Lisa's digital footprint might reveal more. They seized her personal laptop and examined her email, message history, and social media accounts. That's when they found something that piqued their interest. Among Lisa's saved conversations were ongoing chats with several different men, many of whom lived outside the province, and in some cases, across the country. These communications weren't explicit or overly personal, but they hinted at the possibility that Lisa may have been building connections elsewhere, perhaps even planning to leave Calgary altogether. Investigators reached out to each of the men, but every single one told them the same thing. They hadn't seen Lisa and had no idea where she had gone. None of them had hosted her or heard from her around the time of her disappearance. The detective team also looked into the strange email address that had been contacting Lisa's mother. It had sent multiple reassurances over the weeks following Lisa's disappearance, always insisting that Lisa was safe, just taking time for herself. The phone number that had placed the late-night voicemail was next on the list. Investigators tried tracing both, but neither led to any useful information. The email account had been set up through a free provider using a fake name. The number was registered to a prepaid cell phone with no contract or owner information. It was a dead end. In the months that followed, the case remained open but grew colder with each passing week. Flyers were posted, articles written, and Lisa's story was shared on local news stations. Yet, not a single credible tip surfaced. Slowly, the stream of emails to Lisa's mom stopped. The inbox that had once offered hope now became a haunting reminder of everything she didn't know. As the months slipped into a full year, Lisa's mother found herself returning to a painful suspicion, one that had taken root early on, but which she had tried hard to push away. What if Allan knew more than he was letting on? She mentioned it to the police more than once, but every time, they gave her the same answer. They had no solid evidence that pointed to Allan being involved, Without concrete proof, they couldn't move forward with any charges or deeper investigation against him. Meanwhile, Allan's life took a different turn. With Lisa gone, he became a full-time single parent. He eventually found stable work at a new car dealership opening on the edge of the city. The owner was looking for motivated staff, and Allan, needing to provide for his children, stepped into the opportunity. Over time, his routine normalized. The dealership owner's girlfriend began helping occasionally with childcare, watching the kids when Allan worked late. It gave him a bit of breathing room, and slowly things began to look up. Nearly 2 years passed. Allan seemed to be adjusting, even moving on. He had stopped talking about Lisa altogether. Then something unexpected happened. On a snowy evening in early winter, while pulling out of a parking lot after work, Allan's car was rear-ended. The other driver, a woman, had lost control due to the icy conditions. No one was hurt, and the damage was minimal. She apologized repeatedly and assured Allan that her employer's insurance would cover the cost of repairs. As a peace offering, she handed him a pair of tickets to a local hockey game. They exchanged numbers and stayed in touch. Eventually, the two began to see each other casually. For the first time in a long while, Allan considered the idea of building a future with someone new. Then, in December 2014, just over 2 years after Lisa was last seen, Allan went on a short work trip with 2 co-workers. They had traveled to a nearby city for a dealership conference. While relaxing in the hotel lobby, Allan's phone rang. The call came from a number he didn't recognize. On the other end of the line was a man who introduced himself as a detective. He explained that he had recently been assigned to Lisa's case and was now the lead investigator. There was a pause, and then the detective spoke carefully. "We have reason to believe Lisa is no longer alive," he said. "And we've obtained a warrant to search your home again. In fact, our team is already en route." Allan's co-workers, who were sitting with him at the time, later recalled the change in his expression. In an instant, his face went pale, his hands trembling slightly as he set the phone down. For a long moment, he didn't say anything. Then he quietly asked for a cigarette, despite having quit months before, and told his colleagues, "I think I need to talk to you." Allan sat quietly for a long moment, his hands clenched together, his mind racing. Then, in a flat, almost mechanical tone, he began to talk. He told his co-workers that 2 years earlier, on a seemingly ordinary day, he and Lisa had gotten into yet another argument. He couldn't even recall what had started it. Maybe it was something trivial, something small. But as was often the case with them, small disagreements could spiral out of control quickly. Emotions ran high. Words were exchanged. And then, according to Allan, everything became a blur. He described the moment as if it had happened outside of time. The next, Lisa was lying motionless, and the reality of what had happened began to set in. Allan claimed that what followed was not premeditated. It was panic, pure and simple. He said he felt overwhelmed and frozen with fear. The weight of what had just occurred crashed down on him, and instead of calling for help, instead of explaining or seeking support, he made a decision, one he now believed he couldn't take back. He decided to make it look like Lisa had simply walked away. After telling the story, Allan turned to one of his co-workers, a man he had come to trust over time. Allan remembered that this colleague had once shared a deeply personal experience from his past, something tragic. Years ago, the co-worker had been involved in a drunk driving accident. He crashed his car, and tragically, his friend, who had been riding with him, didn't survive. The memory haunted him, but it also gave him a unique perspective on panic, consequence, and regret. Allan, now consumed by his own crisis, looked to him for guidance. With trembling fingers, Allan started laying out possible options. His thoughts were disorganized, bouncing from one idea to the next. He considered disappearing entirely, leaving his old life behind and running somewhere far away. He thought maybe, just maybe, if he could get ahead of the situation, he could escape the consequences. At one point, He floated the idea of hiring a lawyer to block the warrant, though he admitted he didn't think there was enough time. Then, almost in passing, he mentioned something darker, wondering aloud whether burning down the house would destroy any remaining evidence. But almost immediately, he dismissed the thought, acknowledging that a fire likely wouldn't cover everything and would only draw more suspicion. In the end, Allan seemed to settle on one thing: fleeing might be his only chance. His co-workers, caught between disbelief and loyalty, didn't try to stop him. Some even agreed that disappearing could be his best bet. Allan began mapping out where he might go, how quickly he could leave, and whether anyone would help him. He had no idea, however, that time had already run out. What he believed to be a private conversation, shared among friends, was already too late to matter. Because that phone call he'd received from the detective? It hadn't just been a routine notification about a warrant. It was the final act in a year-long, tightly orchestrated police operation. Every word Allan spoke afterward would ultimately work against him. Behind the scenes, law enforcement had been working on Lisa's case with renewed intensity. In 2013, the province of Alberta implemented a new set of legal tools under its revised missing persons legislation. These updates gave investigators greater authority to gather evidence in prolonged disappearance cases, especially those with suspicious circumstances. Lisa's case was among the first to benefit from the new approach. When her file was reassigned to a newly assembled task force, they began building the case from scratch, methodically re-examining everything that had once seemed like a dead end. Their first breakthrough came from examining Lisa's final known phone activity. That strange voicemail Lisa's mother had received late one night? Investigators were finally able to access the phone data. They discovered that it had originated from a disposable prepaid cell phone, a device that had only been active for a short window after Lisa went missing. In fact, the phone had only ever placed 5 calls in total, 1 to Lisa's mom and 4 others to Allan. This detail raised immediate red flags. Allan had never once mentioned receiving calls from the mystery number. Not only was that omission suspicious, it strongly suggested he had information he hadn't shared. But even more damning was the location of the calls. All 5 originated from the same cell tower, one that served the area near the house Lisa and Allan had shared. If Lisa had really left town, there would be no reason for her phone activity to remain rooted in her old neighborhood. Now on high alert, investigators decided to dig deeper into Allan's financial history. What they found next pushed the case into new territory. On the exact day Lisa was last seen, Allan had made a series of purchases at various local stores. They weren't the kind of items most people would buy on the same day. A large plastic storage bin, bleach, rubber gloves, wooden boards, cement mix, a heavy-duty bucket, and perhaps most oddly, several bags of cat litter. The last item seemed especially strange. According to everyone who knew Allan well, he was severely allergic to cats. He didn't own one, and he couldn't even be around them without experiencing strong allergic reactions. So, why the cat litter? The list of purchases taken together suggested a troubling possibility. But troubling as it was, it still wasn't enough to bring charges. They needed something more, something undeniable. Then came the next big discovery. Investigators were able to match the prepaid phone's model to one sold at a local Walmart. Records showed that a phone matching that exact model had been purchased with Allan's debit card just weeks after Lisa vanished. The trail was tightening. Still, detectives knew circumstantial evidence wouldn't hold up in court. To make their case truly solid, they needed either a confession or a body. And so, a bold and elaborate plan was put into motion. A covert operation that would insert undercover officers directly into Allan's life. The mission was given a code name, Operation Aurora, and it would become one of the most carefully orchestrated sting operations in the province's recent history. The first move came quietly. A female undercover officer was tasked with creating a natural, believable encounter with Allan. After carefully observing his routines, she found an opportunity. One day, while Allan was backing out of a parking space, she lightly bumped his car. It was minor, no damage, but it created a reason to talk. She apologized. They exchanged a few friendly words, and she offered to cover any minor repair cost. Over time, the conversation evolved into a casual friendship. A few weeks later, she introduced Allan to a friend, another undercover officer. This man was posing as an entrepreneur opening a new car dealership, and he offered Allan a position on the sales team. Allan, eager to stabilize his life, accepted quickly. What he didn't realize was that this new job and this new friendship had been designed from the very beginning to win his trust. To maintain the illusion and keep Allan fully convinced that everything around him was real, investigators went to extraordinary lengths. The fake car dealership where Allan had been hired wasn't just a backdrop, it was fully operational. From signage to inventory, customer walk-ins to staged paperwork, everything was put in place to give the appearance of a legitimate business. Nothing was left to chance. Law enforcement spared no detail, knowing that Allan was the type to notice if something didn't feel right. In fact, the undercover operation had become so embedded in Allan's world that it mirrored his actual daily routine. Multiple officers were brought in to play roles as fellow employees, customers, mechanics, and even managers. Each one was carefully selected and trained to maintain the story. They were given backstories, schedules, and personalities that made their presence convincing. Day by day, trust was built. Allan began to develop real relationships with these people. People he believed were co-workers, mentors, and friends. They shared casual conversations during breaks, swapped stories after shifts, and even celebrated small victories at work. These weren't just acquaintances. In Allan's mind, they were a community. One officer, posing as a friendly and down-to-earth employee, even introduced his girlfriend to Allan. She quickly became involved with his children, offering to babysit from time to time when Allan had to work late or attend events. Unbeknownst to him, she too was a highly trained undercover officer, one more piece in the elaborate web being spun around him. As weeks turned into months, Allan lowered his guard. He began to speak more freely, sharing personal details and vulnerabilities with the very people who were documenting everything. Detectives watching from behind the scenes agreed that the operation had reached a critical point. Allan had grown comfortable. He trusted his new circle completely. And that's when authorities knew it was time to move to the final stage of their long-term strategy. The next phase would be a carefully orchestrated scenario designed to push Allan emotionally, to create just enough pressure to cause him to slip. A mock work trip was arranged. Allan and two of the undercover officers, whom he now considered close colleagues, were sent to a different city under the pretense of scouting for a new dealership location. The setting was controlled, and the environment carefully selected to minimize risk. While Allan was out of town and in a relaxed state of mind, the lead detective placed a well-timed call. The voice on the line introduced himself calmly and professionally, saying he had just been reassigned to Lisa's case. Then came the carefully delivered message. Police had secured a new warrant to search Allan's home, and the search would begin shortly. That was all the detective said before ending the call. The plan worked exactly as intended. What Allan didn't know was that both undercover officers with him on the trip were wearing hidden recording equipment. The moment the call ended, they subtly shifted the conversation. Allan, visibly rattled, leaned forward and asked them what they thought he should do. Within minutes, he began to unravel. The sense of control he had maintained for 2 years began to fall apart in real time. His words came in fragments at first, just enough to suggest that he had something to hide. But the officers kept the dialogue going, supporting him emotionally, encouraging him to come clean and be honest. Allan took the bait. Eventually, his confession came in full. He admitted that Lisa hadn't simply disappeared. He spoke about the argument, the panic, and his decision to stage her departure. It was all captured on tape, every word recorded by the very people he believed he could trust. What he didn't realize was that the net had been closing in around him for over a year. Shortly after the confession, Allan was arrested without incident and transported back to Calgary. Meanwhile, a team of investigators was already en route to his home. This would be the second official search of the property. The first had occurred 2 years prior, shortly after Lisa was reported missing. At that time, police had combed through the residence and even the basement, but found nothing that raised alarms. This time was different. Investigators now had detailed information, specific clues pieced together from Allan's recorded admissions and past purchase records. In the basement, they focused their attention on a section of the floor that looked newly sealed. In one dimly lit corner, a raised cement platform stood out. It didn't match the layout of the rest of the room, and the material used in its construction seemed odd. The size, shape, and dimensions aligned exactly with the wooden board Allan had purchased 2 years earlier. There was no question. This spot needed to be examined further. While carefully searching the area, police located Lisa Mitchell. It was the confirmation that investigators had quietly anticipated, and with it, the case shifted from circumstantial suspicion to irrefutable fact. But what police found next complicated the narrative even more. As they continued searching through Allan's belongings, detectives examined his personal computer. Among files and emails, they found a pattern of search history that raised additional concerns. These weren't idle curiosities. They suggested a calculated effort to cover tracks. Even more telling was the revelation about the emails sent to Lisa's mother. Although they had seemed convincing at the time, assuring her that Lisa was safe, they were later traced directly back to Allan's computer. Forensic analysis confirmed that he had composed and sent the messages himself, carefully phrasing them to resemble Lisa's tone. But the most chilling discovery of all involved Lisa's cell phone. Hidden software had been installed without her knowledge, spyware that allowed Allan to monitor her conversations and record her audio in real time. Investigators found evidence that he had intercepted and edited one of her recorded calls to create the voicemail that had misled Lisa's mother. That message, the one that had caused so much confusion, had been manipulated from the start. The audio hadn't been a real-time cry for help. It had been carefully staged. This revelation directly challenged Allan's earlier claims that the incident was spontaneous. Despite the mounting evidence, securing a conviction for premeditated murder proved difficult. The timeline, though suspicious, lacked a single definitive act that clearly established planning beyond all reasonable doubt. In the end, prosecutors agreed to a plea deal. Allan was charged with second-degree murder, a decision that allowed for a lesser sentence but ensured a conviction. Allan's legal team advised him to accept the plea. By pleading guilty, he could avoid the risk of life imprisonment for first-degree murder. He agreed, but even then, he claimed the entire situation had been an act of self-defense. He alleged he acted out of fear. Prosecutors argued the opposite, that Allan had orchestrated an elaborate cover-up and carefully controlled the narrative for years. The judge ultimately ruled that the available evidence did not meet the threshold for second-degree murder. Allan Schieback was found guilty of manslaughter instead, a verdict that carried a sentence of just 7 years in prison. The response was swift. Prosecutors filed an appeal, arguing that the sentence was too lenient given the scope of the deception, the efforts to mislead Lisa's family, and the emotional toll. The court reviewed the case and agreed to increase the sentence, but only by 3 years. Allan would now serve a total of 10 years. In the end, however, Allan Schieback served just 5 years before being granted early release on parole. But his freedom didn't last long. Shortly after his release, Allan violated the terms of his parole and was sent back to prison to serve the remainder of his sentence. He remained incarcerated until 2022, when he was formally released from custody. For many, the punishment felt far too light for the scale of what had happened. And yet, from a law enforcement perspective, the case was seen as a major success. A long-term, undercover operation had achieved what traditional investigative methods could not. For over a year, a dedicated team of officers had embedded themselves into Allan's life, earned his trust, and quietly built a path to the truth.